Let's get started. So today we're digging into how humans hear and how we can leverage psychoacoustic principles to make better mixes. This was inspired by a article that I saw on SonarWorks website, and they go through some similar points as I'm going to go through here. So if you're interested in checking out their article, you can go to that link that's there at the bottom of this slide. So psychoacoustics. What does psychoacoustics even mean? When you start looking at audio, you realize that there are objective ways to measure things, such as, let's say, this SPL meter. This SPL meter will give you a very predictable reading based on the physical world, right? The microphone creates a certain voltage based on the pressure level in the area, and then this will tell you, based on a weighting, you tell it, it'll tell you how much sound pressure level there is in a room. And that's very, very predictable. When you start getting into psychoacoustics, you realize that perception isn't necessarily correlated one-to-one with physical reality. Okay? What's really important as we get started in this conversation is that psychoacoustics and the tips I'm going to show you today are based on not only our anatomy, but our psychology as well. Okay? The human auditory system includes a few different stages. Okay, and we have this binaural microphone here to sort of demonstrate that, and I'll be plugging this in and giving you some demos in a moment. But you'll notice first the outer ear, and that's really what a binaural microphone is designed to emulate, is the outer ear portion of a human hearing system. It's got the pinna on the outside, as you can see in this diagram. There is also an ear canal. I interviewed the creator of one of the researchers on the Neumann KU100 microphone. That's their binaural mic. And he was saying that in their research, they found that the ear canal is mostly only important for binaural recordings down to about 2 centimeters into the ear canal. So the pinna, that outer part of the earlobe and all of the other part of the ear that you see from outside the head, that's the most important part. And we're going to talk about how it's important in a moment. Once you get through the ear canal, you reach the eardrum, and then we enter the middle ear. And this is sort of a set of 3 bones that amplify the mechanical energy. So we have acoustical energy coming in, it gets funneled into the ear canal, and then hits the eardrum and creates mechanical energy, which is amplified by these 3 bones. And then those 3 bones create vibrations within the inner ear, which contains the cochlea. And the cochlea is a snail-shaped apparatus that has nerve cells within it, and when those nerve cells are moved, it creates chemical reactions, and that creates a synapse, or I don't really know the neurological term, but it creates neurological activity within the brain. And that's really important for this discussion, because it's not just the physical parts of the ear that we're going to talk about today, but it's also the way our brain perceives things differently depending on the stimuli it's receiving from those. Okay. The first thing I want to talk about is localization. So right here I've got a binaural microphone, and we'll notice a few things about this. It's got 2 ears first off, and so a typical human auditory system will have 2 ears placed on the side of the head, and that gives us access to a few localization cues. Okay, the first one, as I show here on the slide, is an interaural level difference, or an ILD. And what that means is that a sound that comes from right in front of us is going to reach each ear, and it's going to be the same level in each ear. But if you heard a sound that comes off from one side, it's going to be louder in the closest ear compared to the further ear. And to demonstrate this, let's actually switch from my shotgun microphone setup here to a actual monitoring for you of this binaural microphone. So now you're hearing me through the binaural mic, and let me know in the comments if this is loud enough. I want to make sure that everyone's hearing this okay before I go any further. But as I'm doing this, notice that right here we've got analog 1 and 2. These are the preamps of my RME interface, and that's what we have this connected to. It says it's kind of low. Okay, let me turn that up a little bit. So I'll go in here and I'll just turn up the preamp a bit. There we go. And how's that? It's about 40 dB of gain, and hopefully that's a little bit louder for you. But what I want you to notice as I'm going here is that right now you see these meters, and I'm in the center of the two mics, and so the level in each mic is equal. And you can see that with the meters right here. But if I start to go over to your left side, you start to see that my voice is louder in the left ear on this microphone than the right ear. Okay, and I go back to the center, and I then go over to the right side, and we see that the level is greater in the right ear. Right, this is an interaural level difference, and that helps your brain localize where a sound is coming from. The sound in this case being me. I'm going to turn this down just a little bit so I don't blow out your ears for this next demo. 10 dB is probably a little excessive. Let's turn it down about 3 dB. I'm going to take this shaker here, and I'm just going to go around you. And as I'm doing this, check out that meter on the input here. In the center, it's equal. If I go to the left, a little louder on the left side. Back to center, and over here, it's louder on the right side. Now, in order for this to work really, really well, it's important that you wear headphones. I forgot to mention that. So if you haven't done so already, go ahead and use headphones. Interaural level differences can be experienced pretty easily on speakers. So if you were using even a smartphone with stereo or stereo speakers, you probably heard the demo pretty well. And you can employ that with a basic pan knob. So let me switch back to the shotgun mic. So right now I've got this loopback mix for you using my interface. These two outputs, stereo output is feeding you. And right now I've got this sent to it. And if I use the pan knob and I pan it over to the left, so my shotgun mic is now going to your left ear, and you'll notice that the level is much greater on the left side. I can do it a little bit, and this way it's still coming out of the right ear, but it's just louder in the left side. If I go back to center, that'll be even in both the left and right speaker on your end. And then if I go over to the right side with the pan knob, we see that it's louder in the right speaker. Okay, so this is an interaural level difference, and that's what a basic pan knob is based on. Now, it's not just the interaural level difference that allows us to localize sounds. It's also these other two. Let's move into the interaural time difference. This one's a little bit harder for me to demonstrate, but I want to bring up the concept to make sure that this is connecting for you in terms of audio production. So right here, we've got these two microphones, and their capsules are cardioid, right? So this one picks up directionally in this direction, and this one picks up mostly from the front in this direction. And right now they're stacked on top of one another. Okay, so this is called a coincident pair. They are placed in the same point in space, which means that if I put this up like this to record a guitar, for example, it's going to be equal loudness in each if it's coming from the front, because those cardioid patterns overlap perfectly. If something's over here on the left side, it will be louder in the left microphone than in the right. And if it's over here on the right side, it will be louder in the right microphone than in the left. A coincident pair takes advantage of interaural level differences, or ILDs. Now there's also near coincident pairs. And this would be more like this sort of setup. Okay, this is an approximation of an ORTF pattern. Okay, it'd be actually a little bit wider. But you can learn more about this on the Audio University website. I've got whole articles written about stereo mic techniques and videos to accompany them. But a near coincident pair will, now this is going to be, let's say, from my perspective, the right microphone, and this will be the left microphone. And a coincident pair, a near coincident pair, takes advantage not only of interaural level differences, because of course if it's over here, it's going to be more on axis than it is over here, okay? But it also is going to take advantage of interaural time differences. So if the sound is in the center, it's going to reach both microphones at the same time. If the sound source is over to one side, it's going to reach one microphone slightly before reaching the other microphone. And it's extremely, extremely subtle, right? That's less than a foot. I think it's about, 6 inches or something like that. And the time is so minuscule to the point where I couldn't look at the meters and demonstrate it like I did the interaural level differences. But I think you understand in principle that if a sound is closer to one mic than the other, the sound is going to reach the closest mic slightly before reaching the other in our brains, either through an ITD, interaural time difference, or an IPD, interaural phase difference. It's going to be able to localize that sound, in addition to the interaural level difference that it has to work with. Okay, so if we take this back to the binaural microphone, then we know that here's a top-down view of what we're seeing here. So I'll face this up. So if a sound is over here, it's going to reach this microphone before reaching this microphone. And the same could be said for your ears, okay? So let's go ahead and switch back to that binaural mic. And it's the same exact demo, but when I go over here, now my voice is reaching your left ear slightly before reaching your right ear. And what's amazing is that we can do that with just a simple pair of cardioid microphones. You could also do a Bloom line if these were figure 8. That would do the interaural level differences. And then you can use different types of directional microphones to do a near coincident pair to take advantage of those interaural time differences. Now, where it gets really interesting with a binaural microphone is when we introduce the next concept, HRTF. Okay, so I'm going to switch back to the shotgun mic. HRTF stands for head-related transfer function. Okay, a transfer function is just a fancy way of saying well, it's not even that fancy. The function something has as signals transfer through it, as it transfers signals. The transfer function of our head and ears is referred to as a head-related transfer function. And this is when we get into the pinna, the actual skull itself. And we could approximate this a little bit with the microphones being directional and considering off-axis coloration, but where it gets magical is when you start actually modeling the shape of a human ear and the width of a human head, especially with like the Neumann KU100, which actually has the whole head, nose, and some microphones even have a torso. Basically, when a sound comes from one side and it reaches one ear without any obstructions, and then it gets to the other side, it's somewhat shaded from this apparatus or this mass that's between the sound source and the other side. So that's one part of it. Also, though, the pinna it's been with us our whole lives, right? And so over time, our brains have learned to identify not only where a sound is on the horizontal plane, but with the specific shape of our pinna. It's able to identify sounds differently from different directions. And you can think of a head-related transfer function almost as an EQ curve that corresponds to different locations around your head. And if you don't have headphones on already, I want you to go ahead and throw them on, because when we move ILDs, interaural level differences, and ITDs, interaural time differences, those translate to speakers pretty well. But binaural is really intended to be listened to with headphones. So if you have the opportunity to put headphones on, go ahead and do that now. And I'm going to switch back to the binaural mic. Okay, so now you should be hearing me through the binaural mic. And I'm going to turn it down a little bit because I want to use this shaker to demonstrate something. So right here, I've got a shaker, and it's right in front of you. And if I move that over to your left side, it's really, really realistic, especially if you're using headphones. If I go over to the right side, it's really, really realistic. But now what I want you to do, okay, it looks like we've got somebody leaving. Nice to see you. This replay will be on for you later, so you can check it out. This is all on the horizontal plane so far. Right? But what's amazing about interaural level differences, interaural time differences, and HRTFs, head-related transfer functions, is that now we can start to have localization on the vertical plane. Okay? So if I move this above your head, you're hopefully going to start to hear, especially if you close your eyes, it'll go above you and even behind you, which is not really possible with ILDs alone. So hopefully you're starting to hear that, especially if you're using headphones. Let me know in the comments if that's coming across. Another way to demonstrate this would be with something like a triangle. And if you close your eyes and you listen to this behind you, I mean, it's really quite incredible that 360-degree audio can be sent over YouTube in a live stream with just 2 channels. Now, again, it depends on what you're listening to, what you're playing this back on. If you're playing this back with speakers, it will probably still sound like it's in front of you. If you're playing it back on headphones, it should sound a lot more immersive. However, let me switch back to my shotgun mic. However, there are some limitations with this. So for me, I remember sitting down and learning about binaural audio for the first time in my Audio 2000 class. My teacher, Professor Hufker, he showed us a recording called Virtual Barbershop. And if you've never seen Virtual Barbershop, check it out. Make a note to check that video out. I think it's on YouTube for free. But you close your eyes, and this recording, Virtual Barbershop, has been made with a microphone similar to this, a binaural recording. And what's amazing about it, I remember feeling chills because you close your eyes, and if you're using headphones, it sounds so realistic that when you open your eyes, of course you knew you didn't really go to a different place, but you're a little bit surprised that you're still sitting in your Audio 2000 class with all of the students around you. It transports you to a different place. And I think that that is something that's absolutely incredible. Now, Of course, to get it, to make a recording like that, you use a binaural microphone. And that can be a little bit challenging because often we want the control of putting close mics on things and using proximity effect and using panning and reverb on certain things. And to make a recording with a binaural microphone alone would really be like the first recordings ever made. You would have to mix by placing things in the room so that it sounds perfect at the position of the microphone. And that's just impractical in a lot of modern musical styles. Okay, but what's incredible is that modern protocols have been created, or modern algorithms, I'm not even sure what you'd call them, modern tools have been created that allow you to take mono sources and run them through a binaural panner. And you can mix using these tools so that you don't have to record everything with a binaural mic in order to create a binaural mix. Okay, I'm going to show you that in just a second in the DAW. But you may ask, how is that possible? How does someone make a tool like this? But you can imagine that if you had a binaural head, like the KU100 from Neumann, and you put it in an anechoic chamber, and then you took test speakers, and you put one in front, and you made a whole dome of speakers, or even a sphere of speakers, and you fired test signals like pink noise or frequency sweeps, and then you recorded the EQ curve, or the difference that the pinna and the head-related transfer functions have, or if you record the impact that the head-related transfer function has, the transfer function of the head and ears, if you record that, you can then create a plugin that you could send a mono signal into. I'm about to show you this with a shaker. It's just a mono shaker signal going into the binaural panner, and then we're able to change and create a binaural experience for the listener. Of course, this is going to require headphones, which leads to a few problems I'll talk about once we watch this video. Let me demonstrate this technology using a free plugin that you can download using the link in the show notes below. It's called DearVR Micro, and it's a binaural panner. A basic pan knob, like the one built into a DAW, is based on the concept from earlier. Louder in the left side suggests that the sound source is to your left, and louder on the right side suggests the sound source is to your right. This principle provides a good stereo image with speakers, but on headphones it sounds like the sound comes from within your head rather than from in front of you. That's partly because of crossfeed between the left and right channel, and partly because when you listen through speakers, your skull and your ears will have effects on the audio that tell your brain where a sound comes from. But you don't hear these effects on headphones. The sum of these effects is called a head-related transfer function, or HRTF. Microphones such as the Neumann KU100 aim to capture these HRTF effects during the recording process by utilizing a dummy head with microphone capsules in the ears. This takes advantage of the three primary localization cues: interaural level differences, where the sound is louder in one ear, as we've already discussed; interaural timing differences, where the sound reaches one ear slightly before reaching the other; and HRTFs, which include the spectral differences caused by acoustic interaction with the head and ears. Think of this as an EQ filter that changes depending on where a sound originates. Binaural microphones are useful for not only making immersive recordings, but also for understanding how sound at different angles and frequencies will be impacted by HRTFs. If you took one of these dummy head microphones, placed it in front of a speaker, and rotated it, you could measure the HRTF at a variety of points along the horizontal plane. To capture the horizontal and vertical dimensions, you could place the binaural microphone in a dome or a sphere of speakers and measure. Theoretically, that data could then be loaded into a plugin like DearVR Micro, which performs an HRTF simulation, allowing you to pan sounds that were recorded with a normal microphone, such as this shaker, horizontally and vertically.
We can simulate the shaker in front, side to side, above, or behind us using this plugin, which has a built-in HRTF model. Simulated reflections can also be important for immersiveness because they give our brain additional information about the size and shape of the space we're listening in. But that's a topic for another video. Let's open up a different plugin called DearVR Pro 2. This plugin will help us to visualize the controls that are used in the world of immersive audio production. You can control the azimuth, you can control the elevation, and you can even control the distance. Generally speaking, the parameters of a panner plugin can be exposed for automation so that the engineer can program a combination of all of these parameters to match sound for picture or create effects.
Pretty cool, right? So that QR code I dropped will take you to the DearVR Micro plugin if you want to try it out. There's also a link below the video. But as I mentioned, there are a few limitations with this. So first off, let me say that immersive audio, I understand why people say, it's just a fad, it's just an attempt for people to sell us more speakers. And to a certain degree, that is absolutely true. But there's something different about this wave of immersive audio compared to other like surround formats or quadraphonic, in that we can do binaural renderings, and that's amazing. So I think that the key to making immersive audio, meaning that there's a horizontal plane and a vertical plane and there's depth, I think the key to making that mainstream is making it easy for the consumer to adopt. And I think the fact that they only need headphones will make that a lot more likely to happen. There are some challenges that we're still trying to overcome. First off, as I mentioned before, a binaural mix played through speakers is not ideal. It's probably going to sound more phasey than anything because it's assuming that the driver is very close to your ears and it's applying the HRTF. Whereas with your speakers, your HRTF is still very active, right? A binaural mix also, it works for some people and it doesn't work for some people. For me, it works, and that's why Virtual Barbershop was so impactful for me. But for you, you may be watching this and saying, I don't really get what all the hype is about. This doesn't sound like it's behind me at all. And the reason is kind of because we all have differently shaped ears. So if I show you this ear here, this is made to replicate or to model the generic ear shape. But of course, we're all different sizes and shapes, right? So this ear shape may be radically different from yours. And over time, you have learned to perceive the world with your ears. And therefore, this ear may not do the trick for you, if that makes sense. Another thing in the same exact very related to that is these plugins like DearVR Micro, and even like a binaural renderer like that used by Dolby Atmos or Sony 360 Reality. These things, they can use generic HRTFs. And so the algorithm is based on the research done. And they tried to make it work for most people. But again, it won't work for everybody. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So there's the problem where all of our ears are shaped differently. So one way we can fix that is something like what Sony is doing. I've gone to some trade shows and they have put me in a room and they put microphones inside my ears, and I sit in the listening position, and they treat me like I'm that KU100. and they fire the test signals, and then they measure how my head-related transfer function impacts the signal, and then they can give you your dedicated head-related transfer function. For this, keep in mind that unless you're doing it in an anechoic chamber, it's going to take in consideration the head-related transfer function and the transfer function of the acoustical space and the speakers being used, right? You can probably compensate for the speakers being used, but they're actually doing some services, I believe, where they go to people's studio, these mostly larger studios and educational institutions, and they record each individual's head-related transfer function, their custom HRTF, and then that person can take that studio in headphones with them anywhere, which is amazing. And I think that that's a really cool way to go. Of course, that's not quite as scalable as you'd hope. I don't think Sony is going to send their team here to my studio and do that for me. And they're probably not going to come to your house either. So the question becomes, how do we get our custom HRTF created, and how does a company provide that service at scale? One thing they might do in the future is allow you to go to a good sounding studio and get your head related transfer function measured, and then you can take that studio as it relates to you anywhere you want and mix. I think that's really powerful. But then you start to think, okay, are consumers actually going to do that? Probably not. So the generic HRTF really needs to get better. There are other solutions where you can take like a smartphone camera and they'll look at the topographical imagery of your ear, and they'll try to make a custom HRTF for you that way. It has varying results, right? Getting back to that problem I was describing, though, we have a binaural mix that we can deliver to you in headphones. But what if you're watching Netflix, or you're playing a video game, or you're watching YouTube with speakers? It's important that we know what system you're using. And that's sort of the promise of some of these adaptive technologies, like Dolby Atmos. It's object-based, and it's supposed to know what system you're using and deliver the correct mix. And because the objects are panned, and it's not necessarily send this to the left speaker this many more dB than the right speaker, it's really just like place this object in this place. The system can render based on the system so that it comes across on a variety of systems. The issue is that it's sort of difficult for like even Apple Music to know, unless you're using Apple products like the AirPods or something like that. It's difficult for it to know what playback system you're using. You can of course go in and tell it, and we can do that as audio enthusiasts, but is a consumer really going to do that? And therefore, will immersive audio become mainstream? I'm not sure. These are things that we need to overcome. So I want to take a moment here to ask if anyone has any questions about localization, this first psychoacoustic principle. Of course, if you are an Audio University member, I want to get to your questions first. So rather than leaving the question here in the YouTube or Facebook or Instagram comments, go ahead and put it in the chat within the membership platform, and I will get to your questions first. I don't see any there currently, so let's go ahead and jump through some questions. Doug says, oh yeah, that's cool. It's not a question, but yeah, thunderstorms are an awesome thing to record. That's true. Anything outside, if you take this mic outside, it's absolutely incredible. And I mean, I'd encourage you to download the DRVR Micro or some other binaural panner and put headphones on and try to make a landscape or a soundscape with those tools. Remember that you can automate those different panning things. So you could have a bird fly over your head and to your right, or whatever you want, using automation of the binaural panner. If you have questions, just make sure you put question marks before and after so I can see them pop up. Earpods or different. I think that the frequency response is also important. This is another limitation that we need to overcome. The frequency response of your headphones. And I think this is the reason that like Sony's virtual mix environment, that product I just described to you, that requires that you use Sony headphones. Like, it'll probably work to some degree, but if they can correct for the frequency response and other specifications of the headphones, then they're going to be able to deliver to you the most pure head-related transfer function that they can. The same thing with Neumann's Rhyme plugin. It's a virtual mix environment plugin, and you have to use the NDH30s or the NDH20s to make that work. That way they can correct for the transfer function of the headphones and get back to only the transfer function of the KU100 and the room that it was created in. That plugin Rhyme also allows you to change the width of your ears so that the KU100 pinna would still be used, but if your ears are different spacing, you can account for that. Doug says, can we just get Bluetooth right into our brain? You can do that, Doug, but I'm going to hold out on that as long as possible. I need lossless straight into my brain. No, I'm not looking to get a brain chip anytime soon. Interested to hear if people are resonating with this. Let me know if you have any questions about localization, and if not, we're going to move on to the next psychoacoustic principle that you can use for mixing music and other audio productions. It says, Audio University, thank you for all of the incredible content. I've appreciated your work for years. I have an unrelated question regarding converting hardware if and when possible. We're not going to get to that today, although I would encourage you to become a member, because that's the sort of thing that we created the membership for. YouTube, there's just so many comments coming in that it's difficult for us to get to have meaningful conversations about every question someone might have. With the membership, though, we have real professors and myself in a membership platform where you can ask questions such as that. I'll just give you a sneak peek here. Within our let me share my screen. Okay, so within our membership platform, you'll see the feed. Hold on a second. There we go. So here's the feed, and this includes a post by Mac, one of our longtime members. He's talking about how he recorded this acoustic guitar, and that was posted today. Hopefully we're going to see some comments from different members and different professors that we have in the membership. We have an Ask a Professor section where members can ask questions and get responses from Professor Gabe Herman here, who has been a professor for over 20 years teaching audio production. He'll also provide some video responses to questions as well. This one's about understanding metering and things like that. We have mix reviews where every month we do at least 1 or 2 mix reviews where students can post a mix, and then we go through and listen to them live, and we actually get them up on camera. If we have any members in the comments, actually, let us know. Let the other people know how awesome it is. I know that all the feedback we've received has been positive. So, yeah, I would love to see anybody join so that you can ask those sorts of questions when they come up for you, even though I'm not able to get to them on YouTube. We do have a question here. It says, which binaural microphone do you have? This is the 3DO FS XLR. They have a few different versions. This one, I think, is about, I want to say between $600 and $700. I mentioned the KU100 from Neumann. The 3DO is a more affordable. The KU100 is $10,000, I believe. This one has a younger sibling, which only has a 1/4 inch output if you wanted to use it with a phone or something. And then it has an older sibling, which is the same XLR output, but it has nicer, I think, DPA microphones within it. So that's awesome. Yeah, these are really popular with ASMR content and stuff like that. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next part here. So in addition to localization, we also have masking. This is a psychoacoustic principle that I find really, really beneficial. And I'm about to show you a video that will give you some more details about what it is. But masking, it may in part have something to do with the physical space. Like you can definitely have phase interference when two sounds interact, but masking is actually a psychoacoustic phenomenon. And we know that sounds occupying the same frequency space, such as, let's say, a kick drum and a bass guitar or an electric bass, they can interact. And not only can they interact with one another because they occupy the same space, but if you've got a bass that is in the low end, it may even mask guitar a frequency at frequencies above, right? Because as you'll see in this clip, masking tends to spread upward. That's not only true for instruments affecting and masking other instruments, but a guitar that sounds a little bit muddy, if you clear out some of that mud, you realize that there were high frequencies there that were being masked by the lower frequencies. It's a common problem in bass heavy mixes because, again, like I mentioned, the masking tends to spread upward, meaning that lower frequencies tend to mask higher frequencies. So let's go ahead and move on to a video about this, and we'll answer some questions once we return.
If you've ever struggled to get all of the elements of your mix to fit well together, you're going to find this video very helpful. Listen to this example of a guitar melody track. Now, listen to what happens when I unmute the rhythm guitar track. The melody guitar seems to disappear within the context of the mix, even though it sounded fine when we listened to it on solo. This is at least partly due to a concept called masking. By the way, throughout this video, I'll be using graphs and audio clips from a presentation by Professor Dr. Bernhard Saber. If you want a more in-depth explanation of this topic, check out those links in the description below to watch his full lecture series on YouTube. As you heard in the previous example, the sound of one instrument can mask the sound of another instrument. And because the sound of even a single instrument is made up of many frequencies, it's possible that those frequencies can mask one another. In essence, the instrument masking itself. The principles that I'm about to share with you will help you understand why and when this happens, and you can use that information to make better decisions with EQ, compression, and other effects while mixing. First, I want to show you this graph that describes the threshold of hearing across the frequency spectrum. It's important that we understand what this graph is trying to tell us. On the x-axis, we see the range of human hearing in hertz. It ranges from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. The y-axis shows sound pressure level from 0 dB to 140 dB SPL. The line that is plotted on this graph represents the threshold of hearing, or the quietest sound pressure level that can be heard at each frequency. It's measured by playing a tone for a listener at various levels and asking the listener to press a button when they can just detect that tone. Notice here that a very low frequency or very high frequency is required to be much greater in level in order to be heard when compared to a mid-range frequency. In addition to measuring the threshold of hearing in a quiet environment, we can also measure the threshold of hearing for a tone in the presence of noise. A simple experiment might be to play a tone and white noise simultaneously, instructing the listener to report when they hear the tone. By varying the intensity of the tone in relation to the noise, we'll find out the point where the listener can no longer hear the tone within the noise, and the level where the tone is just detectable by the listener. The results of this experiment will look like this, a graph that's similar to the threshold of hearing graph from before. This time, the graph shows the minimum audible level for each frequency with white noise as a masker. White noise is a type of noise where the energy is evenly distributed throughout the frequency spectrum with equal energy density per frequency. This line represents the results when the level of the white noise is minus 10 dB, and these additional lines indicate that each time we increase the level of the noise by 10 dB, the tone is required to be increased by 10 dB as well in order to remain audible. You can see that this holds true for tones at all frequencies across the spectrum. Here's an audio demonstration of the experiment so you can hear it for yourself. You'll hear the tone and the noise, then the level of the tone will be decreased incrementally until you can no longer hear it as it becomes fully masked by the noise. Then the noise will be muted and you'll hear that the tone is still present even though you couldn't hear it within the context of the noise. This illustrates one of the big reasons that it's so important to manage hiss and room noise in our recordings. If we don't keep noise to a minimum, it may become difficult to hear the quietest details within our recordings. Luckily, most modern preamps and digital audio equipment have extremely low noise specifications compared to the recording and playback systems of the past, so as long as you use reasonably good gain structure, it shouldn't be a big problem. The energy in white noise is evenly distributed across the spectrum, so it masks a very wide band of frequencies. However, if we filter the noise into narrowband noise that only contains a specific range of frequencies, we see different masking behavior. Here we see that narrowband noise will primarily mask the frequencies that are contained within the noise and the frequencies just above and below that range. Shifting the center frequency of the noise, we see that the masking shifts too. This time, we'll hear narrowband noise centered at 1.2 kHz. Then we'll hear a series of tones that incrementally increase in frequency. We'll hear the first few tones as they're below the range of the noise. Then the tones in the middle of the range will disappear within that noise. Finally, we'll again be able to hear the frequencies as they go higher and higher and come out the other side of the narrowband noise. This helps explain why you might sometimes have difficulty getting a kick drum and bass signal to work together. If both the kick and bass occupy the same range of frequencies, they'll mask one another. The next time this happens to you, try using an EQ to shape each signal so that the two signals don't compete for the same frequency band. You may have seen some of my videos where I talk about ear training for audio engineers using the vowel method for identifying frequencies, but if not, be sure to download my free guide at audiouniversityonline.com/eartrainingguide. Oh, by the way, you may be asking, what is that plugin that shows the masking that's occurring within the mix? This is the equalizer within the Isotope Neutron plugin bundle. I'll leave a link to that bundle in the description below this video. In addition to studying the masking effects of white noise and narrowband noise, we can also look at the masking behavior of a pure tone. Here's a graph showing the masking curve of a 1 kHz tone. Again, we see that the masking is most effective at 1 kHz, and just like with the narrowband noise, the masking from a 1 kHz tone also somewhat extends above and below the frequency of the tone itself. However, look at how the results vary as the level of the tone is increased. The 1 kHz tone seems to more effectively mask high frequencies compared to low frequencies as its level increases. This is referred to as the upward spread of masking, and here we find one of the most helpful tips for mixing, especially when it comes to using EQ. The low frequency components of one instrument may mask the higher frequency components of other instruments in the mix. So, when carving out space for each instrument in the mix, consider that the masking will primarily spread upward in the spectrum. This is why cleaning up the mud in the low mids often has an automatic clarifying effect for the mids and high mids. But there's another lesson that we can learn from this. Remember earlier when I mentioned that the instrument can mask itself? Well, this is what I was referring to. Sometimes an instrument may sound dull, as if it's lacking energy in the high frequencies. And while we may be tempted to address this problem by boosting the high frequencies with an EQ, this masking principle suggests that there might be another solution. Perhaps the signal already has enough high frequency energy, but the lower frequencies are masking those higher frequencies. Instead of boosting the highs, maybe we can cut the lower frequencies, reducing the masking that's occurring. By cutting the lows and low mids with an EQ, we can effectively brighten the sound of the guitar by revealing the high frequencies that were once being masked by the lower frequencies. Most instruments and the arrangement as a whole are complex signals, meaning they're made up of several different frequencies. As we just saw, this means we should be aware of the various components that make up each instrument, and it's important to recognize the masking effect that those components have on one another, as well as the effect that the components of one signal may have on the components of another signal. This graph shows an identical set of tones at different levels. Notice that the 20 dB increase per tone results in a greater amount of masking in the frequencies between each tone. Remember, the masking potential of each tone extends upward in the frequency spectrum as the level of each tone increases. And that fills in these spaces between the tones as the signal gets louder. Keep this in mind when mixing, specifically when you're choosing your monitoring level. There may seem to be more clarity and space in your mix at lower levels compared to higher levels, and it's important to consider what your mix will sound like when it's inevitably enjoyed at various levels by consumers. Be sure to check out Professor Dr. Saber's series on psychoacoustics if you're interested in learning more. He goes into much more detail than I did here, and he explains even more concepts that will help you better understand the way we hear sound.
The way we hear sound. It cut off early. The way we hear sound. So hopefully that was valuable. I do have a comment from one of our members, Richard, and I think it was answered after within the video. It says, is there a plugin that shows any self-masking that's occurring on any instrument channel? The isotope neutron does have, the EQ within there does have that orange indicator that tries to show you where masking is occurring with two different channels. So you can select, maybe you're on the bass channel and you can select kick drum, and then it's showing you where they're interacting. That's not perfect though, because like I said, masking is a psychoacoustic principle, and just because that says that there's masking doesn't mean you have to EQ until that goes away. It can sound good where even when that is not indicating, or it can sound good even if that's indicating there's masking, and it can sound bad even if that's indicating that there's not masking. There could still be masking occurring. Whether or not there's a plugin that shows you where self-masking is, I don't think so. I mean, maybe. But for me, it seems that that would be technically challenging because all it knows is the instrument itself. Now, as we get into AI and what things should sound like and things, maybe they'll start releasing plugins like that. But I would recommend use your ears, even if a tool does allow you to see that sort of thing. Continue leaving questions now if you have questions about masking, or if you have questions from earlier about localization. I'm happy to answer those. Here we've got one that says, can using low pass and high pass filters for most instruments, especially for bass, help prevent masking problems in the mix? In live sound, it can certainly help eliminate unnecessary rumble and things that tend to occur in live sound. Now you saw in the acoustic guitar example that I used a high pass filter, and that sort of clarified that track because those low frequencies were no longer masking the higher frequencies. So you could use a low pass, or really a high pass filter that takes out the low frequencies. You could use that in an attempt to do the same thing. I'm not going to go ahead and say that you should use it on most instruments because there is always a cost when using any tool, really. And when it comes to EQ, the cost is phase distortion. This is something that Gabe Herman talks about in the Mixing Essentials course that you can find by becoming a member. A link is below the video. But in there, he talks about how high-pass filters, even bell cuts and boosts, they create phase distortions. So if you use the tool and it creates the outcome you want, then do it. I wouldn't recommend using EQ if there's no effect or if there's no reason to do it. Usually, if EQ causes a change that's positive, it's worth the cost that comes with phase distortion, or it's worth the accompanying phase distortion cost. But yeah, don't do things unless it sounds good. Is the moral of that story. Let's see what this says here. Panning can help create space too. Ultimately, a better mic position or different mic could eliminate the need for phase altering EQ. Well said. I have a video that's all about that. I forget what I called it, but it's about, you can move a microphone. So if a guitar is too boomy, rather than saying I'll fix it in post, you can just move the microphone maybe a bit further away to alleviate some of the proximity effect, or maybe you can move it a bit closer to the fretboard so that you're catching less of that resonant sound coming from the body. Yeah, great point. I also want to say that arrangement can be really useful. Rather than using the same guitar that tends to have a sort of boomy sound anyway, I could have used two different guitars. And members, look forward to a Nashville strung guitar lesson that's coming out from Gabe Herman within the membership. The idea being that you can, if you're stacking acoustic guitars, or any instrument really, you might arrange the song differently to where things are not stepping on each other in the arrangement, and therefore you won't have to stop them from stepping on each other in the mix. I'm reading through some of these comments. If you have questions, that's why I'm here today. I'm here to give you a more interactive learning experience because, sometimes just watching videos, it can lead nowhere if you don't have the opportunity to clarify what you're learning. I don't see any more questions though, so I think we'll go on to the next principle, unless somebody has something. Going once, going twice. All right, let's move on to the next part. I do want to mention though the ear training guide that I just threw out there in that video. Here's a link to download that. That is, if you haven't seen any of my videos on ear training, that's one of the coolest things that I've ever heard from a teacher. So I told you about my psychoacoustics professor earlier. That professor also taught an ear training class called technical ear training. And I have a few videos on that. It's the vowel sound method. If you've seen it, you know it. It really, really changed the way that I hear. And if you've been doing the ear training, you'll realize that when you hear, let's say 1 kilohertz, that's attached to the ah sound. So if you hear too much ah, then you can reduce the amount of ah and pull it back down. But the problem in the frequency domain is not always too much of something. Sometimes there's too little of something. And if you apply this idea of masking that we just discussed, you can realize that if you hear too little, or if you hear too much ah, it might be because there's too much 1 kilohertz, which sounds like ah. Or it might be because there's not enough 500 or O to mask that ah. If you've not seen the ear training videos, you're probably like, what is this guy talking about? But basically, there are vowel sounds that can be attached to each of the octave bands between 250 hertz and 4 kilohertz. So 250 hertz, if you played pink noise and you boosted 250 hertz, it would sound like ooh. If you boosted 500 hertz, it would sound like oh. If you boosted 1 kilohertz, it would sound like ah. If you boosted 2 kilohertz, it would sound like a. And if you boosted 4 kilohertz, it would sound like e, right? So we start by boosting a frequency and then pulling that frequency down. But sometimes it's actually a problem where a lower frequency is not masking that higher frequency enough. So if there's too little ooh, it might come across as a little bit too much oh, right? If there's too little 250 hertz in a sound, it may come across perceptually as too much 500 hertz. So check out the ear training guide. That'll get you started not only with those vowel sounds so you can refer to them, but also some cues for low frequencies and also some cues for higher frequencies like 8 kilohertz and 16 kilohertz. And there's a free tool that you can use to practice. Cool. Well, let's move on to the next one. This next one is, I think, really incredible. This has to do with the missing fundamental. Now, you may have seen my recent video on this, and I find this to be one of the most intriguing things. It came from a book that I read recently called This Is Your Brain on Music. And the idea is that if you look at this chart here, you see an oboe, a clarinet, a flute, and a trumpet. And they're all playing the same note. But you'll notice, and you'll know, that even the same note played on each of these instruments is going to sound a lot different. Now, what makes them sound different is a combination of the envelope, right? The attack, decay, sustain, release, all of that. And also the timbre is also influenced by the overtones and the harmonic character of the instrument. So the oboe, clarinet, flute, and trumpet, they all have the same overtones, the same harmonics, but the blend or the distribution of energy throughout those harmonics is different. And that is what I'm discussing in this next clip. Two sounds, and let me know which one you think is lower pitched. If you're like me and most people, you'll agree that the second sound appears to be lower pitched. However, that's actually an illusion. The first sound was a simple 100 hertz sine wave, while the second sound was a 100 hertz sine wave, a 150 hertz sine wave, and a 200 hertz sine wave. We often think of pitch and frequency as the same thing. Higher frequency, higher pitch, lower frequency, lower pitch. And this is mostly true, but there are some strange things that happen when we take into account our perception of sound and the psychological tricks we sometimes play on ourselves. This demo was inspired by a book I've been reading lately called This Is Your Brain on Music, written by Dr. Daniel J. Levitin. Dr. Levitin is a record producer turned neuroscientist and researcher, and I've really enjoyed his book so far. It's all about why we hear things the way we do as humans, and many of the things I've learned in this book have proven to be helpful for mixing and recording music. I've been listening to the audiobook narrated by the author himself, and I'll leave a link for you in the description to get the audiobook for free when you sign up for a new account with Audible. If you prefer the paperback version, you can also find that linked below for less than $10 on Amazon. Using those links supports Audio University at no additional cost to you. One of the things discussed in the book is the idea of overtones, or harmonics. The basic principle is that objects in the world vibrate at several different frequencies simultaneously, and those frequencies are mathematically related. For example, if I play the note A on a guitar at 440 hertz, you won't only hear 440 hertz, but also integer multiples of that frequency: 880 hertz, 1320 hertz, 1760 hertz, and so on. To better understand this pattern, let's simplify the numbers a bit. So rather than a first harmonic or fundamental frequency of 440 hertz, we can use 100 hertz. The first harmonic is the fundamental frequency itself, 100 hertz. That will be followed by the second harmonic, 200 hertz, the third harmonic, 300 hertz, the fourth harmonic, 400 hertz, the fifth harmonic, 500 hertz, and so on. Notice that you simply add the fundamental frequency to itself again and again to calculate these overtones. This alone is a helpful concept to understand because the unique harmonic character of an instrument is one of the key factors that differentiates the same note being played on different instruments. We see and hear the same pattern of overtones from each instrument, but the relative blend of those frequencies defines the unique timbre of the instrument. The same concept is also relevant for identifying different types of distortion and saturation. If you want some help understanding the frequency range of various instruments, download the free instrument frequency guide below. It will help you identify which frequencies correspond to undesirable qualities for each instrument, like muddiness or harshness, as well as potentially desirable qualities, like fullness and bite. It's a great tool for improving your ear for mixing, and you can get access to the guide for free at audiouniversityonline.com/instrument frequency guide, or by using the link below this video. In Dr. Leviton's book, he doesn't just explain what overtones are, but actually dives into something that I found particularly intriguing, which inspired me to make this video for you. In the book, he says, the brain is so attuned to the overtone series that if we encounter a sound that has all of the components except the fundamental, the brain fills it in for us in a phenomenon called restoration of the missing fundamental. A sound composed of energy at 100 hertz, 200 hertz, 300 hertz, 400 hertz, and 500 hertz is perceived as having a pitch of 100 hertz, its fundamental frequency. But if we artificially create a sound with energy at 200 hertz, 300 hertz, 400 hertz, and 500 hertz, leaving off the fundamental, we still perceive it as having a pitch of 100 hertz. We don't perceive it as having a pitch of 200 hertz because our brain knows that a normal harmonic sound with a pitch of 200 hertz would have an overtone series of 200 hertz, 400 hertz, 600 hertz, 800 hertz, etc. This is the principle behind the illusion that I showed you just a moment ago. When you heard 100 hertz by itself, it registered in your brain as a pitch of 100 hertz. And there's no surprise there. The same would be true if we added in the overtones that our brain would expect from a 100 hertz tone, 200 hertz and 300 hertz. But when you heard the combination of 100 hertz, 150 hertz, and 200 hertz, your brain identified this pattern as the overtone series that follows 50 hertz. So even though the 50 hertz fundamental wasn't actually played, your brain perceived it because it recognized the pattern and filled in the blank. By the way, if you find this sort of thing interesting and you love learning about audio, you should put your current knowledge to the test by taking the free Audio University exam. It's just a fun way to test your audio knowledge and learn in the process. You can take the test for free at audiouniversityonline.com/exam. Dr. Leviton goes on to talk about how the firing rate of neurons in the brain are the same as the frequency that is perceived by the auditory system. When you hear a 100 hertz tone, your auditory neurons fire 100 times per second. Then he described an experiment by Peter Janata. The researchers played a version of Strauss's The Blue Danube Waltz that was made up of tones with the fundamental frequency removed. Then they played that piece of music for a barn owl, and this is where it gets really crazy. The researchers had connected electrodes to the owl's inferior colliculus, part of its auditory system, and they fed those signals to an amplifier and speaker. When the music played, the owl heard it, and the electrodes connected to its brain put out small electrical signals. Those electrical signals, when amplified, played the melody of the Blue Danube Waltz through the speaker. I don't know about you, but I found this to be mind-blowing. And if you also like this sort of thing, check out this book that I've linked below, as this is just from the first chapter. But what does all of this actually tell us about mixing? Well, for one, I think it helps to demonstrate that our brains don't actually need to hear a frequency in the mix if other context is provided through overtones within the mix. This is something I originally learned from Paul Willie Green Womack, an educator, producer, and mixing engineer, during a presentation he gave at the AES convention a few years ago. We mix music on full range speakers, which can reproduce a wide range of frequencies. But what happens when that song you've mixed on studio monitors is played back through smartphone speakers? The speakers in a smartphone are tiny and can't produce low frequency sounds. So if you have a low frequency kick or bass element in the mix, there's a chance that a smartphone listener won't hear it at all. But Paul Womack showed me a trick to counteract this problem, and it plays on the same principle we've been discussing in this video. Paul says that even though we know the fundamental frequency of, let's say, 50 Hertz won't play through a tiny smartphone speaker, we can use saturation to create some harmonic distortion to excite overtones. And there's a chance that the smartphone listener can still perceive the low frequency elements through the phenomenon we've discussed in this video, restoration of the missing fundamental. Let me show you a basic demo that illustrates this. This track has a 100 Hertz tone generator on it, which will represent a low frequency element in the mix. And we can imagine that when played through studio monitors, we can hear it and see it on the RTA graph. But when the listener's smartphone speakers effectively place a high-pass filter on the sound, the low frequency sound disappears, and it gets a lot quieter on this RTA graph. As an extreme example to illustrate the concept, we could apply some saturation to the mix with this in mind. Of course, we don't want to ruin the mix with excessive saturation, we just want to use it as a tool to excite some higher frequency harmonics. When I turn up the amount knob on the saturation plugin, we see overtones arise. This will play through studio monitors along with the low frequency sound itself, but when we add the smartphone high-pass filter, it allows the people listening on a smartphone to hear these overtones, even though the fundamental has been lost. And because of this, the smartphone listener's brain now has context that can help them fill in the blank in the form of an overtone series that's harmonically related to the lost fundamental. To make this more practical, imagine we have an 808 sound in a mix that's too low to be heard on a smartphone speaker. We can still hear the attack of the transients a bit because it's at a higher frequency, but the resonance gets lost. So saturation is a tool that can enrich that sound with higher frequency harmonics, which would allow the sound to fill in the mid-range and translate better to more playback systems. So even though the smartphone listener only hears those higher harmonics, their brains still tell them that the fundamental frequency of the 808 instrument is the original frequency that can't be heard on their speakers, but can still be perceived thanks to the saturation. The saturation we've added, right? If you didn't catch that. This is a really cool concept, and like I mentioned, Paul Womack taught that to me for the first time, and I think it's fits right into this concept. We don't necessarily need to think just about what our meters are telling us, because our brain can do weird tricks on us, and sometimes those tricks are obstacles, but if we understand them, the tricks our minds play on us can actually be beneficial, and we can leverage them to make better mixes. Within that video, I mentioned the Audio University exam. I'll put a link to that right up here. This is something that I'm pretty excited about. You know, it's just a fun, semi-competitive way to test your knowledge and learn in the process. Now, if you've taken the Audio University exam before, the first version of it it didn't really tell you what you got right or wrong. And that was a big shortcoming, I believe. But we've updated the Audio University exam. So now as you go through the test, it will tell you if you got it correct. And if you didn't get it correct, it'll help you understand why. So I encourage you to either use the link in the description below the video or use the QR code and put your audio knowledge to the test. It's questions that range from all different sides of audio production. And yeah, I want to open the door now for questions. So if anybody has questions about localization, masking, or the missing fundamental trick, please leave them in the comments below. To recap, these are psychoacoustic principles that we can use to make better mixes. And psychoacoustics includes things that maybe don't align perfectly with reality. You've got the outer ear, the middle ear, the inner ear, and the brain. And that combination of things can help us perceive the world. But sometimes if you try to make objective measurements, they won't necessarily align one-to-one with what we actually perceive. So, anybody have questions? Let's open the floor for questions. And yeah, I'm excited. Hopefully this format was cool. And if it was, let me know that in the comments, and I'll be back. I really enjoy spending time interactively with people. The geek in me really enjoys putting the demos together and trying to show them to you live. That's big thanks to my RME interface. This video is not sponsored, but they are a partner of the channel, and I really enjoy using RME for that reason. It allows me to set up these cool sub mixes so that I can do these demos for you live. And I want to do more of that if you've enjoyed this. We see, yes, very, very good. Nice. It's really cool. Awesome. Yeah, it looks like this was a popular format. So I think what I'll do is next month about this time, I will do a presentation on another topic. So let me know in the comments if you have ideas for that. And again, we're answering questions here. Is there an ear training to help me recognize the missing fundamental? My brain didn't fill it in like it should have. You know, if your brain didn't fill it in, I've seen that in some of the comments on that video. And at first, it didn't really work for me either. I think actually, if you are used to hearing frequencies and hearing music, and you're really trained in that, there's a chance that that actually makes it more difficult for your brain to be fooled, I think. Because the first time I heard it when I was setting up that demonstration, I didn't really, I just heard, of course, the other one's higher because there's these overtones. But then I played it on a smartphone, and that actually helped me really hear it. So if you're listening to it on a great pair of speakers, maybe try listening to it on a smartphone, and maybe that'll help you experience the illusion. So please explain the masking again to me. Yeah, so masking can occur when instruments occupy the same frequency space. So let's say that the kick drum and the bass are both containing a lot of energy at like 100 hertz, okay? Well, if the kick drum, it has its fundamental at 100 hertz and the bass is also making a lot of energy there, it could cause you psychoacoustically not to really perceive the kick drum. Some ways you can address that is you could cut some of the 100 hertz out of the bass so that the kick drum has space where it resonates best. Or maybe you use the missing fundamental trick in addition to that, and you use some saturation on the kick drum so that it's not just 100 hertz, but it's also 200 hertz and 300 hertz and 400 hertz, so that that higher harmonically related content can give context to where the kick drum is. Yeah, it's all of these things can be put together. In addition to the masking that can occur with two instruments occupying the same space, I had also discussed that instruments can mask each other if a lower instrument, it's possible that a lower frequency instrument can mask a higher frequency instrument. And that's due to the upward spread of masking, where lower frequencies tend to mask higher frequencies. So that can occur between instruments, and it can also occur within an instrument. If you have a muddy guitar, for example, if you move the microphone or if you cut some of the mud out with EQ, that could allow some of those higher frequencies within that one track to shine through. Because maybe before, those lower frequencies were masking the higher frequencies. So masking is something to really keep in mind when working not only with mixes that contain different instruments, but also just a recording. Here's a question from one of our members, Andrew. Have you ever heard of auditory scene analysis? This put together everything you talked about today and how grouping or how to group or dissociate vowels that I asked about in the Audio University live stream. I've not heard that auditory scene analysis, I think, except for when you brought it up in the past, Andrew. I'll have to look more into that. I'm struggling to understand what you mean exactly. So if you want to give us more context, or just those watching, maybe search auditory scene analysis. Yeah, that might be something to look into. And it sounds like it's very similar to what we've discussed here. Yeah, the vowel ear training guide surprisingly helped me a lot. Should check it out. So if you have not downloaded that yet, here's a QR code. There's also a link in the description. It's a free download. It's just a way for me to give you a free guide, and you put your email address in. I'll email it to you, and then we can stay in contact over time. Each week we round up new videos, old helpful videos, and put it in a newsletter. Those often contain giveaways as well from some of our partners, where you could just sign up and you might win some free gear or free software. So thanks for mentioning that. I think, yeah, the ear training, like I had mentioned before, is really, really powerful. Looking at these other questions here, if there are any, I'll stick around for a few more minutes. So if anyone has questions, please leave question marks before and after, so that I can see them more easily. And let's stick to this topic, because I want this video to continue to be useful for people who watch it on the replay. We're talking all about psychoacoustic principles like localization and masking and restoration of the missing fundamental. And if you're just joining, go back to the beginning, because I had some really cool demos where I set up a binaural microphone, and I played some clips from previous videos to really tie all of these concepts together. If you have questions, please let me know. Here's one. Oh, I already answered that one. If you're interested in asking questions about unrelated topics, I mean, as long as they're about audio, I encourage you to check out the Audio University membership. Adam said earlier, he's been one of our founding members, said, Adam here, I can vouch for the quality of the membership, and he's one of our most active members. The QR code right there will help you learn more about the membership. It's all about taking YouTube a step further. So it's not just one-way content being thrown at you and really keeping you from doing what you need to do, which is practicing, right? We post courses like the Mixing Essentials course, and then you can apply what you learn to a mix and post that mix to be reviewed by the course instructor. Or you can ask questions to the course instructor and myself, and we can just have a two-way conversation. And we have live events like office hours, mix reviews, and we also have an Ask a Professor section where each month the professor answers a few questions that are posed by members. So this is a really good way to get a more well-rounded experience, similar to what you would get in a real in-person university, right? Not a real university. I love when people say that, like, this isn't a real university. That's true. But I am trying to provide educational experiences to people without charging them hundreds of thousands of dollars in the process, right? So if you're interested in getting access to real Audio University professors from actual universities, then join our membership and you get access to those people at a fraction of the cost. Let's see if we have any other questions here. Oh, this is a great point. Yeah, nice. Do visuals cause psychoacoustic effects to us all? Yeah, I mean, if you are watching a video and you see, let's demonstrate this real quick. So I'm going to go back to my binaural mic. So now you're hearing me on the binaural microphone. And first, realize that you're hearing me here. So if you turned your head to your left, I would be on your left. And if you turned your head to the right, I would be on your right. I said that backwards. If you turn your head to the left, I'm going to be louder in your right ear. I'm going to reach your right ear first, and your pinna, or the pinna on this, assuming you're using headphones, are going to indicate to you that I am to your right. So I'll place this in the camera's perspective, and I want you to first look at the screen, and actually first I want you to close your eyes and listen to this shaker, okay? Now open your eyes and tell me if the shaker is in the position that you heard. Okay, so now close your eyes again. And now open your eyes, and the shaker is probably in the place you heard it. Close your eyes again. And open your eyes. And right now, this is placed behind you, as you can see here. And did you hear that with your eyes closed? Okay, now keep your eyes open and see if the impact is more apparent, okay? So probably what you noticed is that the impacts of the binaural recording are more potent when you have your eyes open and you see where the thing should be on the screen. So yeah, that has a huge, or that plays a huge role. So let me go back to my shotgun mic. So the question was, do visuals cause a psychoacoustic effect? Yes, absolutely. There are some other really cool psychoacoustic and visual illusions that occur, such as if I said two words like bend and fend, and I recorded that. If you close your eyes, you can hear the difference. But if I said the word fend and I have video of me saying bend, it may actually trick your brain into hearing the word bend. Now, I don't know if that's actually the way that works. There might have been different words, but I know I've seen illusions like that in the past. So you can actually trick your brain into hearing different words by reading lips, even though you're actually hearing audio of something different. So, yeah, wow, yes, right. So that is definitely the case. Visuals can impact especially sound localization. Another question here. Can you briefly speak about our auditory system's ability to attenuate prominent sounds? For instance, a lot of advice I've been given is to limit the length of time you spend mixing due to this. There are a few ways that I can see maybe answering your question. One thing is like the cocktail party effect. where if we have a bunch of people talking in a restaurant, for example, and we like the sound that's hitting our ears is a very complex waveform that contains all of that noise and the person we're trying to listen to. But focusing on the person is something humans can generally do, although I struggle to do that in many cases. That's called the cocktail party effect, where we can zone in and hear only a part of the overall sound signal that we're receiving. Now, it sounds like what you're talking about, it has more to do with fatigue and mixing fatigue. Another psychoacoustic principle to keep in mind are the equal loudness contours. I wonder if I have that pulled up here. Let me actually go to that here. And I'll open up an image and share my screen. So this is the equal loudness contour. And what this shows us is that the threshold of hearing, the quietest sound that people in this test could detect, is this bottom line. But as we increase level, the line across frequencies becomes more and more even, right? So actually, if you're listening at a very high level, things will sound frequency-wise more balanced. So that's one thing to consider when mixing. It's probably advantageous to mix at a lower level so that you're not fooling yourself into thinking that frequency balance is more balanced than it actually is. But I still don't think that gets to your exact question, because what you're talking about is more the time domain. And while I know that there is such a thing as mix fatigue, where if you're doing it for a really long time, your ears will not be as effective. I'm not exactly sure how to back that up with science. I just know that as an experiential thing, but it's a good point. And I know it to be true just from doing it. But yeah, it's a good point, and I do think that this question is also related. Can ear fatigue cause your ears to have the sensation of the compression of certain frequencies during mixing? That seems to be my experience. It almost seems like dulling, right, when you listen to the same thing or anything for too long a period. I would recommend taking breaks. That's just because I was recommended that same thing from my mentors. Take breaks. I wish I had a better answer for this question about what actually causes mixed fatigue. I wonder if it has something to do with the cochlea and those little nerve cell hairs that line it. Maybe there's a physical wearing out of those, but again, I'm not really sure. So sorry, I wish I had a better answer. Yeah, super good chat. Nice. I haven't been able to read every chat, but because I'm doing this solo. But yeah, I'm glad. And I mean, that's what our membership's all about too. There's almost 300 members, and they're all probably very similar to you. So if you're anything like me, my audio friends, I could count on one hand who I know in my hometown, but in the membership, I have almost 300 people who get it and are going through the same thing. So if you want more opportunities to talk with people about that, become a member. audiouniversityonline.com/join the community, or you can use the QR code here, and there's also a link in the description below. Let's see. Any other questions about psychoacoustics? Happy to answer anything. I'll stay here for another few minutes so I can deliver on that promise to make this an interactive learning experience. Hopefully you've found this discussion to be helpful. Let's see, do we still have a lot of people here? Yeah, I mean, looks like we've still got 91 people here with us. So if you have any questions about psychoacoustics or want me to clarify anything I've discussed here, please let me know. Oh yeah, tinnitus, tinnitus, whatever you say. I've got that too, unfortunately. That ringing that is caused by hearing loss. Sorry to hear that. You've got it as well, but you're right. It's a challenge, and you can. Yeah, I mean, if you love music, you keep listening to music, but the best way to avoid that is to protect your ears, which there was actually one place where I didn't protect my ears, and I can tell you that the day before that and the day after, my hearing has never been the same. So please use hearing protection. It's important that you can hear if you want to mix. Yeah, it's sort of psychoacoustic in a way. If you have lost your hearing in these high mid frequencies, you may tend to mixes that sound kind of harsh and brittle because it sounds normal to you. But in fact, there might be too much energy in those places where you've lost your hearing. So something to consider, and really not even consider, do it. Wear hearing protection anytime you're around anything loud, whether that's a concert, mix at low levels. Wear earplugs if you're using saws and other loud machinery in your work. Wear earplugs, protect your ears. Is standing waves psychoacoustics? No, actually. A standing wave is a physical phenomenon that occurs in a room, for example, where the walls are areas of maximum pressure and minimum velocity. So the air doesn't move very much at the walls, but there's a lot of pressure buildup at the walls. And at a certain frequency where the wavelength aligns with that dimension, considering also the density and properties of the materials of the walls, a wave will actually be created where there will be antinodes and nodes, areas of maximum velocity, areas of very little velocity, and then you will also see harmonics of those things. So if, let's say, you've got 80 hertz resonates between the front and back wall, you'll also see 160 hertz resonate like that, and so on. So no, it's not really psychoacoustic. That's actually just acoustic. Good question. Yeah, this is a good point. Natural hearing loss is a thing. Avoiding overexposure is critical to try to maintain it, but most engineers, I imagine, have far younger hearing range than their actual age. Yeah, if you protect your ears and if you care about music, you're likely to be more serious about protecting your ears. I'd say that's true. And also, to your point, you will lose your hearing over time, even if you wear earplugs your whole life. So there's some part of it that you can't avoid and some that you can. Yeah, welcome back, Mac. Mac is one of our long-term members. Still live, he meant to say. Still live. And you have a question. Let's see. So what kind of masking might I encounter if I have a recording of a guitar using one microphone for the room and one microphone up close for the performer? When you say for the performer, I'm assuming you mean for the voice. Masking, like I mentioned, is a psychoacoustic phenomenon. You may encounter more phase interference with this setup. Let's just take away two mics and let's just do one mic. If you've got one mic in front of you, the guitar, first off, is large, and the sound coming from the guitar might reach that one microphone at different times. So there might be phase interference there, where there's a positive and a negative at a similar frequency, and they're going to cancel each other out. And then you consider you're inside a room with boundaries. So sound is going to go straight to the microphone and then reflect off of a wall and come back, and that could cause phase cancellation and phase summations that could distort the frequency balance. And then when you add another microphone in, the sound from the guitar will reach one microphone maybe slightly before or after reaching the other microphone. And same for the voice. It will reach one microphone before reaching the other microphone. And when you mix those microphones together, they could create phase interference. However, those things aren't really masking. It's phase interference. Masking is really a psychoacoustic phenomenon where the cochlea, I forget exactly how it works, but I think the cochlea, the nerve cells are arranged in order of frequency. And so there's something to do, I'm trying to recall from my psychoacoustics class, with the structure of the cochlea itself. That's where masking occurs. So your question, what kind of masking might you encounter when recording guitar? Well, if the microphone placement is in a place that picks up more low frequency than high frequency, first off, that's going to be imbalanced. But then secondly, that low frequency content might actually be masking the little high frequency you do have. So there are many ways that masking could come up there. If you're mixing those two microphones together and you've got a nice clear vocal, but the guitar has a lot of energy at frequencies just below where the vocal sits, that guitar could mask the vocal. I hope that makes sense. Does changing the distance between speakers change the position of the standing waves fall within the room? Yes, it does. That's a little bit outside of the focus of this video, but I do have a video on that. Search Audio University mixing in a small room and you're going to find the answer. So yeah, moving the source impacts the resonance in the room, and moving the listening position impacts where you fall within that resonance. And that's all explained in that video. If you search on YouTube, Audio University mixing in a small room, I think you'll find it. It says an option for a discounted annual membership payment may lead to more take-up. Funny you should mention that. So right here, there's the link to join our membership, and that still is an option, okay? So I think the way it is right now is if you sign up for a $1 1-week trial, you'll get that, and then it will be the monthly fee after that. But if you sign up for that $1 1-week trial, the next screen, I believe, if I'm wrong, just you email me and I'll hook you up. But I believe the next screen is a discounted annual subscription. So I didn't want to overwhelm people, but if you sign up for that monthly, you will get a one-time opportunity to join on a yearly membership. And again, if that's not the case, just write me an email once you're signed up, and I'll get you set up with a year membership. Thank you for mentioning that. When electric guitar players stream live, we hear much phasing from their speaking mic. Yeah, that's true, because you've got a mic on the guitar, and then you've got a mic that's further away still picking up the guitar. And it's the reason why, if I share my screen here, it's the reason why I chose to only have one of these mics open at a time. Because if I take this here, and it's being picked up by both my shotgun mic and this, you can probably hear phasing. Because the distance, the difference in distance between these three mics is changing, and therefore the comb filtering is moving, right? So yeah, it's an interesting point. Again, not so related to this, but I figured I'd demonstrate it real quick. Okay. So we're starting to get into some questions that are just general. Again, if you want to ask those sorts of questions, it's best to just join our membership. That's what that's all about. This video hopefully helps you understand psychoacoustics and how we can play upon those principles to make better, more immersive, more impactful, clearer mixes for video games, film, TV, music, spoken word, podcasts, anything like that. Can be benefited by understanding how humans hear sound. So again, you can find links below for all of the resources that I've mentioned in this video: the Audio University exam to put your skills to the test, the Audio University ear training guide, There's information for becoming an Audio University member. You'll find the binaural panner plugin that I mentioned earlier, Dear VR Micro. You'll find the book that I mentioned, This Is Your Brain on Music. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and I'll see you next month for another live stream like this. Let me know in the comments on the replay what topics you'd like to see covered, and I'll dig through those and see you again with a new live presentation with Q&A. Thank you for joining. I'll talk to you next time.